I agree, Brian said. I loved those kids and was proud of them, even if the donor was Steve. We hugged and shed a few tears. After saying a tearful goodbye to my kids and family, I went back to my house, packed up my stuff to last me a couple of days, and headed to Dallas. And that's when you found out how bad it really was? Asked Ashley, interrupting my narrative. Yeah, I said, resuming my narration after another sip of coffee. The next day, I met with Dave Brooks, a Dallas attorney known as a bloodthirsty shark who usually gets his way in the courtroom. What I didn't realize was that he had arranged for me to meet with all three men I had approached. I was quite surprised to see them all in place when I showed up at his office early that afternoon. Sorry to come down on you like this, Mr. Jennings, Dave said, but after that last video you sent us, we thought it would be best if we all got together. I accepted his apology, and he introduced me to the other two men. John Hancock, a prosecutor from the state's attorney's office, shook my hand and took charge of the meeting. Mr. Jennings, let me start by apologizing for what you've been through, he said. There's no easy way to say this, so I'll just speak up. We have evidence, lots of evidence, showing that Steve Jenkins is not only involved in a number of criminal acts, but that he was assisted by your wife. Not only is he involved in drugs, but we have evidence that he ran guns, engaged in human trafficking and human slavery, and was involved in organizing prostitution. Worse, forensics directly links him to at least 6 murders. Furthermore, your wife is involved in much of this activity, especially the prostitution. We had hoped to have a little more time to put this together, but the threats against you and your children have forced us to push the timeline back considerably. The third man, Don Jacobs, captain of the Texas Rangers, summarized the situation from his point of view. He made it clear to me that the entire sheriff's department had been compromised and could not be trusted to do its job. As a result, he said efforts were made to temporarily replace the department with Rangers and DS's officers until a replacement could be trained and hired. Unfortunately, that includes the correctional facilities where Jenkins and your wife are being held, he said. So we need to act quickly before the situation worsens. As for your divorce, Dave said, I'll be pushing for an annulment given your wife's criminal activity and the deception she and Jenkins used against you. If that doesn't work, we'll file on the grounds of adultery and mental cruelty from what you have provided. I believe you will get all of your assets, as well as custody of your children, if that is what you want. We talked for another hour or so discussing strategy and possible scenarios. Dave handed me a DVD that he said contained videotapes of my wife's actions by private and government investigators. Some of them, he said, were quite graphic in nature and involved several men, including sheriff's deputies. J.N. concluded by telling me what he was going to do with Stephen. Jolene, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, Mr. Jennings, he said. I'm going to impose the death penalty, at least as far as Jenkins is concerned. Your wife might get life in prison without parole. However, I must warn you, he added, your life and the lives of your family members are in danger. Be very careful. From what I've seen, you and your children are damn lucky to be alive right now. People who cross paths with those two usually die. You have our direct numbers, so if you see anything or suspect anything, call us immediately. Do you hear me? I hear you, I said. We shook hands and parted ways. My mind was in a daze. The man I once thought was my best friend turned out to be not only a murderer but also involved in drugs, guns, prostitution, and little else. And my so-called loving wife was a part of it all. The ride home was spent thinking about everything that had happened in the last 17 years. How could I have missed it? Had I been so blinded by love and friendship? I finally got back to town and got a frantic call from my son. Dad, you have to come home right now, Brian said. What's going on? I asked. Just come home now, he said and hung up. I pressed on the gas and made it home in about 20 minutes. When I saw the ambulance and traffic police patrol cars in front of the house, I immediately thought about what I had been told. I rushed to the door just as the paramedics were wheeling the gurney outside. I stopped them to see what was wrong. The paramedic pulled back the corner of the sheet revealing Jolene's face. "I'm sorry, Mr. Jennings," the paramedic said. "She's gone." Oddly enough, I wasn't that upset. Stepping inside, I found Steve being transported on another gurney. His left shoulder had been shattered by a shotgun blast, but judging by his groans, he was still alive. I saw the kids and my father standing off to the side. Thank God, they seemed to be okay, I thought, avoiding the blood on the carpet. I walked over to them and hugged them, making sure they were okay. "What happened?" I asked. Dad replied, "I brought my kids here to buy a few things," he said. "We had been here for a few minutes when these two came inside. I guess they managed to bail them out. Jessica and Jolene got into a fight, and Steve pulled out a gun. I heard a noise and went in the back door. Brian and I were in the backyard packing up. I grabbed my shotgun and walked in just as Steve pulled out his gun. Jolene tried to get him to put the gun down, but it went off. He shot her accidentally, I think, right in the gut. I pulled Steve's shoulder out and called 911. That's when Brian called you. Jolene didn't last long. She was gone by the time the ambulance arrived." "I'm sorry, son," he said. I shook my head. "It's okay, Dad," I said. "You did the right thing." And then I remembered that the security system on the home server was still running. I checked and made sure that the whole incident was captured on video. I showed the video to one of the officers, while the other took statements from my father and children. He asked me to make a copy, which I did. I interrupted my narrative to take another sip of coffee. "Do you have that video?" Ashley asked. "Actually, yes," I said, pulling a disc out of the stack. I put it into the DVD player and pressed a button on the remote. The video began with Jolene and Steve entering the house through the front door. Shortly afterward, Jessica entered the room. "What are you two doing here?" she asked. "You shouldn't be here. You should be in jail." "We bailed you out," Jolene said, "and we've picked up your kids. You're coming with us." "I'm not going anywhere with either of you," Jessica said. "You have to leave now." Jolene grabbed Jessica's wrist. "Oh yes, that's right, young lady. You and your brother are leaving with us now," Jolene said. Jessica squirmed and pulled away from her mother. "No way, Mom," Jessica yelled. "I hate you, and I'm not going anywhere with you." Jolene slapped her hard across the face. "Oh yes, you are," she replied. "I have prepared a fine room for you in Abilene. You will go and do whatever I say." Jessica struck back, hitting her mother in the face. "That's not going to happen," she said. Jessica, stunned by the blow, grabbed Jessica's hands in both of hers. "Oh yes, you are," she said. "You're going to be our new star, aren't you, Steve?" Steve grinned back. "The boys are going to like you, girl," he said. Steve and Jolene laughed as Jessica was hit with the realization of what they were up to. She began to struggle even harder and finally broke free of her mother's grip. "I'm not going, and you can't make me," she said. "Now get the hell away from me." Steve pulled a gun from behind his belt and started waving it around as he spoke. "Well then, I guess it's over for you and your brother," he said. Jolene turned to Steve and tried to reason with him, and Jessica started screaming, calling for her grandfather. "Wait, Steve, we agreed we weren't going to finish them off here. Let's take them to a place off the Indian Trail where they won't be found." "You know the place," she said. Steve shook his head angrily. "No," he said. "No, Steve. Put the gun down before there's an accident. We'll deal with them, but not here." "We have to stick to our plan," she said. They started struggling, and then a loud gunshot rang out, followed by an even louder one. At this point, I stopped watching the DVD. That's when Brian called me. You already know the rest. Ashley wiped tears from her eyes as I stood up from the couch. "I'm done for the day, if you don't mind," I said. "I think I'll go out in the backyard and have a smoke and then go to the cafeteria." Ashley stood up and followed me out. "I'll join you if that's okay," she said. We each had a cup of fresh coffee and walked out onto the back porch. For a while, neither of us said anything. The silence was broken by Ashley. "I forgot how dark and quiet it is out here," she said. "I guess I'm used to city life." She looked at me for a moment before saying something else. "Bill, you need to get it over with before it tears you apart," she said. "Easier said than done," I told her. "How do you come to terms with the fact that the woman you've loved all these years has been lying to you all this time? I feel like I've been cheated out of my whole life. My kids aren't even mine, for crying out loud." "I understand a little of how you feel," she said. "Remember, my husband was a serial cheater, but not everyone is like that." "Yeah, I know," I said quietly. Ashley put her arms around me, trying to comfort me. "Whatever it takes, Bill, just know that I'm here for you, okay? I'll always be here for you." I hugged her back and thanked her. It was nice to have her around, and she felt really good around me. "I can't tell you how many times I wish we had met in high school," she said. I thought the same thing. Maybe if my dad hadn't transferred to Austin, we would have, and none of this would have happened. "You know, I was even jealous of Jolene in those days." "Really?" I asked. "But you were with Steve." "The only reason we dated was that you and Jolene were hot at the time, but I had my doubts even then. I knew Steve wasn't the type to get attached to one girl, he even told me that," she said. "Well, there's no point in crying about it now," I said. "Besides, if you and I had gotten together, you wouldn't be a reporter in the big city, per se." "Yeah, sure. You know, there are times when I'm willing to give it all up just to be with a good man," she added, looking at me. I looked at her again. "You know, I think you would," I said. After a while, we went back to the house and got ready to end the day. I decided to lie down on the couch, as I had done many times since Jolene had been shot. Even though there was a DSS officer posted outside, I was still concerned that one of Steve's buddies might sneak in. Besides, I still wasn't sure how things would work out with Ashley, and I didn't want to escalate things considering I'd only slept with one woman in my entire adult life. Ashley thankfully understood. "Just don't make a habit of it, cowboy," she said, smiling. I lay down and fell soundly asleep, waking up to the smell of bacon. "Rise and shine," Ashley said, standing over me in a long t-shirt. "Breakfast is ready, so come and get it." I got up from the couch and made my way to the kitchen table to admire the scene before me. Ashley had made pancakes, bacon, sausage, grits, toast, eggs, biscuits, and gravy, my kind of breakfast. She even remembered to put peanut butter on the table. I was one of those guys who loves peanut butter on pancakes. "A guy could get used to this," I said. Ashley walked over to the table with fresh coffee. "How long have you been up?" "Not for long, I hope." "You'll definitely get my mom's approval for that," I said. "I'm impressed. Didn't you cook like this for your husband?" I asked. "Foreman, my ex-husband, considered fast food egg biscuits as breakfast," she said. "Dig in, cowboy." "We've got a lot to do today," she added, smiling. "So, what's on the agenda for today?" I asked, savoring the feast on my plate. "Well," she said, "I'd like to see your family today, and then I thought we could visit Jolene's mother. I thought she might be able to give some insight into Jolene's thought processes. Then, if there's time left. Here's your text with corrected errors and improved punctuation. I'd like to stop by the cemetery and take pictures of Jolene's final resting place. And by the way, if you're counting on the same breakfast tomorrow morning, we'll have to stop by the store. You're almost out of everything," she said. I devoured the food like I hadn't eaten in a week, stopping to sip coffee and express my verbal appreciation for Ashley's cooking. Jolene hadn't made breakfast like this in years, and I felt like I'd died and gone to heaven. I finished my meal feeling more satisfied than I had in a long time. I stood up and hugged and kissed Ashley, thanking her for the wonderful breakfast. "That was awesome," I told her. "I guess I better go get ready." "Please do," she said. "You're beautiful, but you need a shave." I went upstairs and thought about Ashley while I showered and shaved. In less than 24 hours, I found myself falling in love with her just like I had in high school. Could it be, I thought, that Ashley and I are destined to be together? For the first time in months, I felt content. Ashley had used the shower on the second floor and was dressed in jeans and a t-shirt. She looked the same as she had once looked a long time ago. Grabbing her laptop bag and purse, she beckoned me to go. We arrived at my parents' house and were greeted by two kids who ran out of the house as soon as I pulled up. I introduced everyone to Ashley, and we walked into the living room. Ashley explained what she wanted to do and asked if she could talk to everyone one-on-one in private. We all agreed, so Mom excused herself and went into the kitchen to make dinner, and Dad took me into the living room. Ashley started with Jessica, and after spending an hour with her, talked to Brian at length. Dad and I waited and spent most of our time talking about manly things: hunting, fishing, soccer. Not much else. We both avoided anything to do with Jolene and/or Steve. A couple of hours later, Ashley came into the room and asked to speak to my dad. I took the hint, grabbed the kids, and went outside to throw the soccer ball around. It took a little over an hour, but she finished with both of my parents and went outside to join us until lunch was ready. The kids seemed to really bond with Ashley, and she seemed to enjoy spending time with us. We split into teams of 2 and played soccer. Jessica and I teamed up against Ashley and Brian and had a great time until Mom said lunch was ready. I enjoyed relaxing with Ashley and the kids, and for a while, I felt like I had a happy family again. After lunch, we said our goodbyes and prepared to leave. Jessica caught up with me before I went out the door. "Daddy," she whispered as she hugged me, "if you don't ask her to marry you, I swear I'll kick your ass." What could I say? I promised her I'd think hard about it. "So, how did your interviews go?" I asked Ashley when we left. "That went very well, thank you," she said. "Bill, I know you're having trust issues right now, so I'd like to explain why I interviewed everyone privately." She was quite perceptive, perhaps a result of reporter instincts. It's good journalistic practice to get independent confirmation, you know. It's not that I don't believe you, I do, and I do believe you. I watched those videos with you, remember? But I wanted them all to feel free to speak out without outside influence. "I hope you can understand me," she said. I actually understood, and the fact that she explained everything without me saying anything meant a lot. "I understand, Ashley. You're doing your job and being a professional. So, have you learned anything new?" "Actually, yes," she said. "Jessica told me that Steve has been making signs of attention to her for quite some time now." "That son of a gun," I said. "I also learned that your family loved you very much and thought everything of you," she added. "They also loved Jolene, but they were having problems with her and thought something was going on with her. They didn't say anything because they didn't want to interfere with your marriage. I think if they knew something specific, they would have definitely said something." "What else did you find out?" I asked. "I learned what it was like to be part of a close-knit family, and I loved it," she said. "I really enjoyed spending that time with you and the kids. Thank you for including me." "I'd love to," I said. "The kids and I had a great time too. I think you made a big impression on them." We pulled up to the apartment complex where Jolene's mother was waiting. Man lived, parked, and headed for the door. "Do you want to interview her privately as well?" I asked. "I don't think that will be necessary," she said. "Besides, something tells me you and she should clear all this up." Now Carter opened the door at the first knock and invited us in. She moved slowly, partly for health reasons and partly because of depression. Her husband, Jolene's father, had died several years ago in a mysterious accident, and after Jolene's death, she had been left alone with no direct relatives. "How are you feeling?" I asked, hugging her. "I'm doing fine, Bill." "Thanks for asking," she said. She hugged Ashley and looked her over from head to toe. "Ashley Marks, you're as beautiful now as you were in high school." Thank you for coming to see an older woman. Ashley smiled as Nam motioned for us to sit down. What brings you here? She asked. I explained what Ashley was doing, and Nam nodded her head approvingly. So what can I tell you? She asked. Well, Mrs. Carter, I'm curious about something. This affair between Jolene and Steve continued throughout her marriage. You must have known about it. I'm curious to know why you didn't say anything to Bill. Na lowered her eyes before answering. She looked embarrassed. Yes, I knew, she said. I'm sorry, Bill. I should have said something to you. You didn't deserve what they did to you. How long have you known? I asked. Almost from the beginning, she said. Remember that year you spent in Okinawa? Steve practically lived with Jolene all that year. They were careful to make sure he wasn't in the house when your family was around. I told her she was making a huge mistake, but she refused to listen to me. So, if Jolene wanted to be with Steve so badly, why did she marry me? I would have let her go if she just said she wanted to be with him, I began. She was a confused girl, Bill. She actually loved you both, but in different ways. You see, to her, you were stable, dependable, a good husband and father. Steve, on the other hand, wanted nothing to do with raising children. He had always been a wild child and didn't want to commit to the bonds of marriage. You were a support for her, and he was a source of adventure. I'm sorry, nah, I said. Jolene had sex with Steve the day we got married. She had 2 children with him and passed them off as mine. In the end, she plotted to kill us all. These are not the actions of a loving wife. I know it's hard to believe, Bill, Na said, but she really did love you, at least at first. At least that's what she told me. So, what happened? Asked Ashley. What changed Jolene so much? People change over time, I guess, Na said. Steve latched onto Jolene and soon began to control her. I told her about it once, but she warned me that if I said anything to Bill, I'd regret it later. Na looked at me. That's why I stopped coming to see the kids, Bill. I'm sorry, but I just couldn't go there and look you in the eye knowing what Jolene was doing. I knew I'd probably say something that would hurt them. Sometimes they scare the hell out of me. Did you know about her abortions? Asked Ashley. Na nodded. Yes, Jolene confided in me about it. I told her she was being stupid and would get caught sooner or later, but she just shrugged it off, said it was her choice and Bill had no say in it. I suggested she do the right thing and divorce Bill. She laughed and said she would never divorce, said it wouldn't be long before she inherited everything Bill had anyway. How long ago was that? Asked Ashley. I don't know, maybe it's been 1.5 years or so, Na said. We left it up in the air for a few seconds. So Jolene and Steve had been meaning to do this to me for a long time? I wanted to say something, Bill, but I was so scared. You know how scary Steve can be. I knew something bothered me about all of this, so I spoke up. Na, did your husband know about all this? I asked. I think so, she said. I know she and Steve were talking just before the accident. Myrna's husband was known as one of the best mechanics in the area, if not the best, and took very good care of all his cars. Investigators called the accident an accident, but were never able to explain how one brake line mysteriously failed and how the traction mysteriously weakened. I guess that's all in the past now, isn't it? Asked Myrna. By the way, I don't blame you and the kids for not attending the memorial service, especially after what she did to you guys. I was hoping a few of her old friends would come, but it was just me and the priest, she added, wiping a tear from her eye. I want to thank you, Bill, for paying for the cremation. I thought it was interesting that you had them put her in a wedding dress. I was hoping that maybe Jessica would want to do that. Ashley looked at me. You cremated her in her wedding dress, did you? Why, I told you I burned her wedding dress. I just didn't tell you that she was wearing it at the time. I also made sure she wore the wedding ring I gave her. To tell you the truth, I thought it was appropriate. I decided she didn't need our marriage, so the last straw of revenge. I get it. Did you cremate her wedding ring too? Asked Ashley. But not the engagement ring, I nodded. She seemed half amused, taking notes anyway. Na said, I want to thank you for making sure I got a Jolene IRA. It helped a lot since I have a steady income and all. Jolene had an IRA? Asked Ashley. Yeah, I said, when she was shot, it had about $350,000 in it. I didn't even know she had it at the time. She also had another $200,000 in a savings account that I knew nothing about. I put it in a trust fund for the kids' college education. Don't ask me how she did it because I don't think I want to know. Interesting, she said, returning to her notebook. She turned to Na. Mrs. Carter, is there anything else you can add? Na shook her head. Nothing that catches my eye. I think you all know almost everything else. Na looked at me. I'm so sorry about the way things turned out, Bill. I put my arm around her. It's okay, Na. Listen, feel free to stop by the kids anytime you want, okay? I'm sure they'll be happy to see you. She nodded and thanked me, then hugged Ashley. Thanks for stopping by, she said as we got ready to leave, and please don't be strangers, okay? We promised to stay in touch, Ashley said, and we left. You cremated her in her wedding dress and wedding ring? Asked Ashley as we got into the pickup. It felt like it at the time, I said. Ashley went back to her notes as I made my way to the cemetery. We made our way through the manicured grounds until we reached the columbarium where her ashes were kept. The short granite plaque read Jolene Carter and listed the year of her birth and the year of her death. There was no further indication on the plaque of who or what she was. At least you treated her remains with some dignity, Ashley said. Well, I said, it was done mostly for Na's sake. If it were up to me, I'd just flush her ashes down the toilet. Interesting that you made them use her maiden name, she added. Yeah, I figured since she didn't have any use for our family in her life, I wouldn't burden her with the family name for eternity, I said. They tried to get me to write something like loving wife, mother on the monument. I figured they wouldn't write cheating jerk or lying, conniving scoundrel, so I kept it simple. Ashley took her pictures and turned to me, putting her hand on my chest. There's still a lot of anger in him, isn't there? Tell me, Bill, did you ever mourn for her at all? The truth was no. In fact, I hadn't shed a single tear since she was shot. All my love for her had been burned away by her lies and cheating. Her threats against the children and myself had pretty much destroyed all my feelings for her. Part of me was ashamed, and it brought tears to my eyes. Damn it, I didn't want to do this in front of Ashley. I shook my head and started to turn away so Ashley wouldn't see my tears. She stopped me and made me turn around to face her. You need to get it out of your head, Bill, before it eats you up, she said. Let it go, and you can move on with your life. What kind of life is this, Ashley? I asked. Everything I thought I had all these years turned out to be a lie. Everything. I shook my head, and tears began to roll down my cheeks. Ashley wrapped her arms around me and pulled me tight against her. That's what happened. I sobbed uncontrollably for quite a while. Ashley didn't say anything but kept hugging me tightly, kissing my face from time to time. I finally calmed down and looked at Ashley. I wiped a tear from her face that had rolled down her cheek. What's that? I asked. She was my friend too, remember? The four of us, you, me, Steve, Jolene, the four musketeers. I loved her like a sister back then, she said. I hate what she turned into, but I loved her anyway. You loved her too, and for a very long time. You married her, raised 2 children with her. That must mean something. You're probably right, I said. Damn right, cowboy. I'm here and now, Bill, she added, and I'll be here as long as you need me or want me. Got it? I smiled. I get it, I told her. She smiled and patted my chest. We need to get to the store before it gets too late, she said. What do you want to do about dinner? I thought for a moment before answering. How about a trip to Charlie's? They're cooking a killer steak, and there's a band there tonight. You're asking me out on a date in front of your wife's ashes? She asked. Why not? I asked. She smiled, kissed me on the lips, and looked at Jolene's marker. Bye, Jolene, she said. Your husband is asking me out. I stared at the marker for a while before returning to the truck. Bye, honey, I whispered. I thought I heard a quiet sob next to me, but there was no one there. I figured it was the wind playing tricks on my mind. Without wasting any time, I walked back to the truck where Ashley was waiting for me. Are you okay? She asked. Yeah, I said, starting the pickup. Let's go get breakfast and get ready for tonight. We stopped by the farmer's market where we bought eggs, bread, milk, bacon, and anything else Ashley thought we might need, and then headed home. Home, what a concept. For a while, I'd thought of this place as just a house, a place where I slept. But now, being here with Ashley felt natural to me. I showered, shaved, and dressed, then waited for Ashley to finish doing what women did when they were getting ready for a date. Finally, she came down the stairs wearing a denim skirt that came down a couple of inches above her knees and a white blouse. She completed the ensemble with a pair of rather expensive cowboy boots. A woman to my taste, she was beautiful, and today she was my date. I offered her my arm, and we walked together to our chariot. Charlie's restaurant was well known in our area for serving the best steaks with all the condiments. Potatoes and string beans with soft cookies completed the meal. Afterward, we had a beer and looked over to the dance floor where several other couples had already started dancing. Do you want to dance? I asked. Of course, Ashley said. We danced and danced and danced some more. We did two-step dances, a few quick waltzes, a few slow dances, and even took part in a line dance, something I hadn't done in a long time. Ashley was with me the whole time but excused herself to the ladies' room a couple of times. We were dancing to a slow tune with our arms around each other when Ashley stopped and slid into me with a soft, sensual kiss. Our tongues lingered for a bit, making me very excited down below. She leaned down to my ear. I love you, Bill Jennings, she whispered. Always have and always will. That's it, and to tell you the truth, I fell in love with it too. I love you too, Ashley Mars, I said. She licked her lips nervously for a moment. Take me home and make madly passionate love to me, cowboy, she said. Otherwise, I'll have no choice but to pounce on you right here. Who could refuse such an offer? Then we better get this situation under control, little lady, I said in my best horrible John Wayne impersonation. She smiled, took my hand, and led me into the parking lot. Take me home now, she purred. And yeah, she started entertaining me in the car. Thank God it was dark and my windows were tinted as much as the law allowed. Otherwise, we might have been stopped. Still, I enjoyed the show Ashley had put on for me. We're almost home, I told her. Good, she whispered. Finally, we got to the house. I parked in the garage and pushed the button, closing the big door. I couldn't wait to get out of the car. Eventually, we calmed down and lay on the bed, her in my arms. I thought about the events of the past 2 days. Just 36 hours ago, I was a depressed, despondent man overcoming the pain of cheating on a lying spouse who had repeatedly disrespected me with a man I once considered my best friend. Now, I had Ashley to show me what it was like to love again. I knew what I wanted to do, but I was afraid she'd think I was in too much of a hurry. Screw it, I thought. Full speed ahead. I looked up at her face framed by long, dark hair. She was looking up at me. A penny for your thoughts, she said. I don't want it to ever end, I told her. Me neither, she said. And what do you propose to do about it? Interesting choice of words, I thought. Must be those damn reporter instincts again. I opened the nightstand drawer and pulled out a small box, the same box that held my great-grandmother's engagement ring. I'd taken it to the jeweler to have it thoroughly cleaned after I'd taken it from Jolene. Ashley was already sitting on the bed, her attention focused on the box. I told her about the ring and what it meant to me. The ring was originally given to my great-grandmother a couple of years before my great-grandfather went to fight with the Germans in World War I. He fought in the Battle of Belleau Wood, the 1917 battle where the Marines were nicknamed Devil Dogs. He survived the war, but exposure to German gas shortened his life considerably. My great-grandmother passed the ring on to her oldest son, who gave it to his future bride after Pearl Harbor. He fought the Japanese in the Pacific and was wounded at Guadalcanal and Iwo Jima. My grandfather returned home, and they had 2 boys, one of whom was my father. By the time my grandmother was about to pass away, my parents had been married a long time, so it was decided that I would get the ring. You see, Ashley, this ring not only symbolizes my love for you, but also over 100 years of Jennings family history. I understand if you'd prefer a new ring, but I want you to know what it means to me. This isn't just a hand-to-hand thing, I said. Ashley looked at me, a tear in her eye. Yes, she said, both. And both I will marry you and promise to make you the happiest man in the world for the rest of your life. And I will be proud to wear your great-grandmother's ring. There is only one condition, I asked. Yes, she said. Promise me you will cancel the vasectomy. I plan to give you a whole house full of kids. Maybe someday I can pass it on to one of our grandchildren. I smiled, put the ring on her finger, and we kissed for a long time before making love once more and falling asleep in each other's arms. The next morning, I woke up to the better-than-sex smell of bacon. I did my morning chores and went downstairs to see Ashley making another of her killer breakfasts. We ate breakfast and packed our bags for the trip to Dallas. We decided to shower together, which naturally led to another hot session of lovemaking. I decided to call the kids and give them the news. After we finally got dressed and packed, I dialed the number and put it on speaker so Ashley and I could hear their answer. Woohoo, shouted Brian when I told them we were getting married. Jessica was just as happy. Good for you, Daddy, she said. You've got a real winner. Congratulations to you guys, my dad said. And welcome to the family, Ashley. Thank you, Mr. Jennings, she said. Mr. Jennings was my father, he said, laughing. You can call me Daddy if you want. Okay, Dad, Ashley said. Thanks again, Ashley. I'm so excited for you too, my mom said. Have you set a date yet? Not yet, Ashley said. I have some things to take care of in Austin first, but that will happen as soon as possible. I had one more thing to discuss with the kids. Brian, I said, you know, I think it would be great if you and Jessica visited your Grandma Carter from time to time. Just stop by to say hi and let her know you're thinking of her. She's still your grandmother, and she misses you. What do you say? Okay, Dad, he said. Good for you, I told him. Brian and Jessica were great kids, and I knew they'd do the right thing. We said our goodbyes and loaded into the pickup truck for the return trip. Something Ashley had said to my mom stuck in my mind. I almost forgot, you were working in Austin. What are your plans? I mean, long-distance relationships don't always work out, I said. Do you know that Jake Carson is retiring as editor-in-chief of the Daily Record? She asked, referring to the local paper. I didn't know that, but I asked her to continue. I sent in my resume last week before we met, and they want to talk to me about the job. He won't retire until 3 months from now, and it will take me 2 months to finalize things at the Statesman. What if you don't get the job? I asked. That's okay, she said. I'll quit my job and live with someone I know in the neighborhood, she teased. Anyway, as I understand it, no one else is interested in the job, and the board really wants a woman at the helm, especially with my experience. And I have some ideas on how to improve circulation. Sounds like you've got it all figured out, I said. Well, I like to be prepared, she said. No matter what happens, you know I'll support you 100%, right? She asked. I wrapped my arms around her neck and looked into her eyes. And that's only part of the reason I love you so much, she said. Think about it. If I had stayed at the Statesman, there's no telling where they would have sent me or for how long. They'd call me up in the middle of the night and send me across the country to cover some lousy politician. Then they'd send me across the country to cover something else. I was tired of living in hotels, so when I saw this opportunity, I had to jump at it. The paycheck probably won't go up much. In fact, the pay may end up going down. But it will be worth it just to live in one place. And if I don't get the job, that's okay too. I can always write online, maybe do some freelancing, or even write a book. Maybe start a blog about stupid people who cheat on their spouses. Personally, I'd rather spend all my time in bed with you. That's the plan I like best. I told her, come on, let's go outside after closing up the house. I plucked a few flowers from the front flower bed. If you don't mind, I'd like to make a stop along the way, I said. Oh, she asked, do you have a girlfriend hiding in an alley somewhere? You should know better, I said. I knew she was just teasing, but the question still bugged me. I didn't make a big deal out of it. You're right, I'm sorry, she said. We both got burned, so it's a sore subject for me too. I was actually thinking about everything you said yesterday at the cemetery. Thought it might be time to put it behind you, I said. Good for you, she replied. We pulled into the cemetery and stopped next to where Jolene's ashes were kept. We both got out of the car and walked toward the monument. I knelt down and placed the flowers in a vase next to the monument. By the way, Jolene, Ashley, and I are getting married. Just thought you might be interested to know, I said. Yes, she's dead. I know, but saying it out loud seemed therapeutic for some reason. Ashley stood over me and spoke too. And if the kids are okay with it, I plan to adopt them, she said. We said our goodbyes and walked back to the truck. Do you really want to adopt children? I asked. Hell yeah, Ashley said. They deserve a mother they can trust. Are you okay with that? I asked. Of course, I said. In that moment, I realized that marrying Ashley was the best decision for all of us. I thought she would be an amazing mother, and I knew Jessica would need a strong, loving mother as a teenager. We were silent most of the way back to Dallas, and Ashley used the time to work on her story. She seemed to be enjoying the task, and I had time to reflect on the events of the past few months. Finally, we pulled up to the hotel and picked up our bags. You know, Ashley said, there's no reason for you to leave your room. The paper's paying for mine until this is over, so why don't you move in with me? I'll work on my articles, of course, but then we'll have plenty of time. I liked the idea and agreed with it. At least let me pay part of the bill, I said. She waved me away. You can pay for our meals, okay? She asked, and it was settled. I checked out of my room and moved in with Ashley. That night, we went out for steak, danced a little, and went back to bed for another night of wild lovemaking. The next morning, we got to the courthouse in time to get good seats. The jurors were brought in from the hotel and immediately began deliberations. Ashley did her duties as a reporter, taking testimony from attorneys representing both sides and talking to other observers and legal experts. It didn't take long for the jury to decide the case. By 1:30, word came that the jury was ready to deliver its verdict to the judge. Steve sat emotionless as the jury entered the room. The judge took his seat and asked if the jury had reached a verdict. We have it, Your Honor, the foreman said, handing the piece of paper to the bailiff. The judge read the paper and folded it back up. He turned to the foreman of the jury again. Is this a unanimous verdict? The judge asked. The foreman answered that it was. Very good, he said. Can the defendant stand? The judge asked. Steve and his attorney stood up. In People v. Steve Jenkins, the jury found the defendant Jenkins guilty on all charges and unanimously agreed to the maximum penalty provided by law, the death penalty, he said. Steve's attorney asked the jury to assess the penalty in the event of a guilty verdict, believing it would be easier to avoid the death penalty because the decision must be unanimous. If even one juror disagreed, the most Steve could get was life in prison without parole. It was a gamble, and Steve lost. Steve was found guilty of 6 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of manslaughter, several counts of conspiracy to commit murder, and a host of other charges that included smuggling, human trafficking, drug trafficking, and prostitution. The defense asked to poll the jury, and the judge agreed. One by one, each of the 12 jurors said they agreed with the verdict and the punishment. Mr. Jenkins, I'm not a big fan of the death penalty, but I completely agree with the jury's decision. If ever there was a case that deserved the death penalty, this is it. I order that you be taken from this court and transferred to Huntsville State Prison, where you will be put to death in the manner prescribed by law at the earliest opportunity. And may God have mercy on your soul, said the judge, striking the gavel. My lawyer approached me and gestured for me to follow him. We caught up with the officers escorting Steve out of the courtroom. He talked to them for a minute, and they nodded, looking at me. Steve looked at me, his eyes red and his body hunched like an old man's. What are you looking at, punk? He said. Right now, I'm looking at a worthless piece of garbage, I said. I always wanted to know what he looked like now. I know my lawyer handed Steve 2 forms and told him to sign them. What the hell? He asked. What the hell is this? One is a form to relinquish all parental rights to Brian and Jessica Jennings, and the other spells out the disposition of your estate upon execution. It's basically a will that says what remains of your estate after taxes and penalties are paid will be liquidated and divided into 3 parts. 1/3 will go to Na Carter, the mother of your longtime lover, 1/3 to a trust for Brian Jennings, and 1/3 to a trust for Jessica Jennings, he said. Steve looked furious but realized he was finally defeated and signed both forms. He looked at me with hatred in his eyes. Are you happy now? He asked. I will, I told him. By the way, Ashley Marks and I are getting married, and she's agreed to adopt the kids. Enjoy hell. I look forward to pissing on your grave. My attorney thanked the officers, and we left. I didn't see Steve again until the day of his execution, and yes, I peed on his grave, but I made sure Ashley wasn't around. I didn't think she'd approve. Finally, the nightmare was over, and I was looking forward to a new chapter in my and Ashley's life. In the aftermath, Ashley stayed true to her promise and allowed me to peruse the article she had penned about my experiences, leaving me thoroughly impressed. The narrative swiftly gained traction, propelling Ashley onto numerous talk shows where she delved into the intricate details of the saga. Despite being courted for a potential cinematic adaptation, Ashley ultimately declined, opting instead to pursue other avenues. However, her literary prowess did not go unnoticed, as she was honored with a Pulitzer Prize for her work. While reluctant to bid farewell, the Statesman recognized Ashley's evolving trajectory and bid her farewell with a generous bonus and commendation upon her departure from the Daily Record. With open arms, the board welcomed her as the esteemed managing editor, and under her guidance, the publication's readership flourished, prompting expansion efforts and staff augmentation. Opting for an intimate backyard ceremony over grandiose church nuptials, Ashley and I exchanged vows surrounded by cherished family and friends. Her parents journeyed from Austin to partake in the celebration, alongside a select few comrades from the Statesman. With her father proudly escorting her down the aisle, he bestowed upon me a hearty handshake before relinquishing her into my care. Brian stood as my best man, while Jessica assumed the role of Ashley's maid of honor, rendering the occasion truly familial. Following the exchange of vows, the priest invited us to face our guests. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to present Mr. and Mrs. William Jennings and their family, he announced, eliciting resounding applause. Brian approached Ashley, enveloping her in an embrace. Welcome to the family, Mom, he expressed, his grin infectious. Tears welled in Ashley's eyes as she reciprocated his embrace, while Jessica tenderly embraced her too. I love you, Mom, Jessica whispered, to which Ashley replied, I love you too, Ashley, enveloping both children in her affection. My father approached, embracing us both before producing an envelope from his pocket. May your honeymoon be filled with joy, he conveyed, revealing 2 tickets for a week-long Caribbean cruise. Thank you, Dad, Ashley and I chimed in unison, embarking on a new chapter of our journey. A decade following our return from the cruise, Ashley gave birth to twins, a son named William Frederick in homage to my grandfather and a daughter named Alicia Marie in honor of Ashley's grandmother. On their birthday, I encountered George Mason, a prominent figure in our community. Accepting my proffered cigar, he extended his congratulations. "Well done, Bill," he commended. Expressing my gratitude, I noted, "By the way, with the upcoming election, some believe you could fill Steve's shoes on the commission. After all, you played a pivotal role in his downfall, akin to the man who shot Liberty Valance, wouldn't you say?" I jest. He chuckled. "Though this time, John Wayne didn't make an appearance from the shadows," he remarked. "I appreciate the offer, but I have new responsibilities to consider," I replied. "Perhaps there's another lesson from our previous discussions about Steve." "And what might that be?" George inquired. "Power tends to corrupt," I reflected. The end. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I trust you found it enjoyable. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for more content.